In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The heads of the local Democratic and Republican parties tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by Worth Morgan. He's chair of the Shelby County Republican Party. Thanks for being here again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Along
with Willie Simon, who's head of the Shelby County Democratic Party. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Along with Bill Dries, reporter with the Daily Memphian. Thank you both for being here. We'll talk about lots of issues. I should say at the top, we're recording this a week before it airs, so there's a lot going on nationally that impacts locally. There's a lot going on locally, so if there are issues we don't get to, it's just because of my schedule. We tape this a week ahead. I'll start with both of you, and I'm internally flipping a coin. You're the first time on the show. I'm going to go to you first.
Okay.
We'll get to issues and specifics and so on, but obviously nationally we live in this very partisan, very divided world. You look at Congress or the Senate. It seems rarely that you get bills that get passed with bipartisan support. It's very rare.
Right.
At a local level, it's different, it seems to me. But how much does party and partisanship really matter in your mind at the local governmental level?
I think it plays a role, but I think for the most part, here in Shelby County, we're trying to just move the needle. I mean, there's a lot of issues out there, a lot of things that have to get done in the city. And so I think in the county, I think there's a lot of bipartisan workarounds that you have to put in place. Because what happens is if we get in a gridlock, that means nothing happens. And so I think for the most part in Shelby County, we try to play ball. And we try to make sure but as long as we're not just going so far away from the values that either of us have, we want to make sure that we're going to progress in Memphis and Shelby County in the best way possible.
Yeah. The same question to you, Worth. You were 8 years on the city council. I mean, and that's a nonpartisan race. You're a Republican, but
in theory, everybody kind of knows where the lines are. So I'd say it's issue to issue. If we're talking about how to pick up the trash and making sure we have good management in place at the city of Memphis, then it's more of a personnel and policies and procedures issue than a party issue. But if you start talking about taxing legislation, you start talking about gun control and some of the other hot button topics that do come in front of the body, then I think it doesn't necessarily become partisan so much, rather than these are really driving principles that guide the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, and the people that are associated with each, they continue to have those driving principles when they bring it to the issue. So it's more of a revealing, I guess, of the divide, rather than that divide itself forcing itself on the issue.
One more from me before I go to Bill, and that's how much pressure do you feel? I'll stay with you, Worth, from national leaders, President Trump, most prominently in the Republican Party right now, the priorities and initiatives that come from the national level that you feel as chair of the party here, well, we got to get in line with that.
I wouldn't say pressure. I'd say excitement. I think for the first time in a while, especially once President Trump was sworn in, we saw all those executive orders that came down that same day. You saw his 30-minute inauguration speech. People didn't feel pressure to get in line. They were raising their hand and excited to sign up, volunteer, and say, yes, we've been thinking the same thing for a while, and we're excited for the work to begin. So I think that has been the overwhelming sentiment, that there's been a positive wave of energy. Even at our Shelby County Republican Party reorganization convention several weeks ago, we had a huge crowd of people that were interested to vote for new officers and to hear the new vision and message.
And we'll talk about some of those specifics, but again, that same general question to you, pressure from the national level of priorities that the Democratic Party backed Joe Biden, or when Kamala Harris was right, to fall in line with those initiatives.
Right. So when we say wave of energy, I mean, he said positive. We don't see it so positive. I mean, we've seen trickle-down effects here just in Shelby County, as we start trying to think about how we're going to protect our citizens with safer gun laws. We start seeing this heavy-handed kind of thing that comes down the pike, and we're like, here we need to make a decision on the safety of our citizens. And then we hear this national agenda that's saying, hey, well, guns are good, and we don't need to make any changes around that. And we have to look at I think you have to look at it from community to community to understand how it impacts. If we take a state of Tennessee gun law and say, hey, yeah, well, it works in rural areas, but what works in rural doesn't work in urban. And so for us, when we see a national trend or something like that, when we start seeing how it affects healthcare, how it affects women's health, how it affects just everyday life, those things really start, taking a toll on us.
Let me bring in Bill.
And my question is, what happens to the excitement that you see on your side of the partisan divide when you read about things like National Institutes of Health funding being cut when it comes here?
Well, there are going to be disagreements about how the country should be managed. When you've got half the people who would identify the Republican Party or vote for the Republican Party, of course there are going to be disagreements about how that governing takes place. But I would say and not so much pressure to be unified on the issues. We still have our opinions. We're still allowed to voice them and talk about them. But if there is any pressure, it would be more about supporting. And my belief in getting on board with making sure that you stay united, that the disagreements that we are experiencing maybe within the party about what would be best pales in comparison to the disagreements that we have with the Democrat Party, and that we've got to stay focused on that fight, politically speaking, and being able to push forward an agenda that we largely agree on. Of course, there's some disagreements here and there, but we largely agree on this versus the agenda that we've seen over the last 4 years. So let's get some good work done.
So to that point, when you talk about the National Institute of Health, and I mean these are actual issues that's going to affect everyone, not just Democrats or Republicans, but it's going to affect healthcare as a whole. I know that as we start mulling around with what budgets we're going to cut, we're actually going to cut out innovations. We're going to cut out opportunities in healthcare to deal with the diseases that are running rampant in the country. We know that there are disparities out in our rural areas where we have to come out and make sure that we have the initiatives in place to move the needle as it relates to healthcare. So when we start thinking about that, and then we say there's excitement, we don't have excitement about that. It's actually disparaging to think about the fact that now we can say we're going to cut the budget for cancer research, and we're going to go in and we're going to give the top 1% a tax break. So to the average person, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So.
Well, and the question goes back to ultimately what is the role and responsibility of government? Are we taking on things that, even though we may think they're good in general as society, is it really the role of government to do it, or are there better mechanisms in place, like donating to St. Jude, who does the cancer research in its place, rather than being government funded? That's a tough one that hits close to home here, but a lot of the pushback right now seems to be around branding, such as cutting the Department of Education has been a big issue. People don't want education to be cut, but if it were aptly named the Department of Oversight and Redundancy in Education, people would be all on board with cutting it. And that's kind of what they do, even though they're branded in a different thing. So we have to look past exactly how it's being pitched to us, what's being cut versus what actually is being cut. And a lot of it is redundancy, nor the responsibility of government to fund.
To be fair, it's not like Democrats are united in just the reaction to the second Trump administration. Mm-hmm. And you talked about this at the Unity rally. You said, we're all over the place as Democrats when we need to be focused more.
Well, when I said that, one of the things that we ended up doing, when you're not necessarily so in touch with the grassroots efforts that are happening. I think sometimes you get a little off the beaten path. I mean, sometimes we can focus on issues that really don't move the needle as it relates to the voters. And I think that's one of the things that we found as we started talking with voters. I think our messaging could have been more crisp as it related to the price of eggs and how we're putting legislation around to make sure that the everyday person has an opportunity to live, love, and exist in America with all the things that we've promised as a country. I think it's important for us to be able to, give people some insight, that we have insight in our messaging to let them know that we're listening to them, that we hear what they're talking about. Now, on the flip side of that, we don't want to make empty promises, because what we heard from the president is, hey, when I get in, right away, we're going to drop those grocery prices. Well, eggs are still $5. And so we haven't seen that. And what happens is, I felt like we had to have a messaging around what the economy was doing at that particular time. Inflation was dropping. There was some progression in the economy, but we didn't tout that message.
But how do you plan and talk about legislation when there are supermajorities and Republican supermajorities in Nashville, and Republicans have narrow majorities, but majorities nevertheless in Washington?
Well, one of the things that we have to do, we have to point to the issues, and we have to point to the issues that affect the people. And one of the things, I always look at it like this: if you don't let people know it's a 3-alarm fire happening, it's going to be a problem. You have to, once they start seeing what's happening with these executive orders, the back-to-back things that are going on in the community, there are people actually fearing to walk out the door that are with immigrant families and that kind of thing. There are so many things that are happening all at once that when you wake up in the morning, you're saying, did he sign something today? And that is what moves the needle in communities, whether it be on the national level or the local level.
It's not a bad thing for people to be afraid to break the law.
Well, I don't.
In the sense of immigration or something else?
In general. I mean, people should be afraid not to pay their taxes. People should be afraid to speed. People should be afraid that, if Bill were to reach across the table and punch me, he wouldn't do that because he's a good guy. But, there are other people that won't do it because they're afraid they'd be caught in the consequences of it. So we're a nation of laws, and it's not a wrong thing to have laws in place that people are afraid to break.
Yeah, well, I think nobody agrees with lawbreakers, but I think if we take a situation where we start seeking out situations where we can push, I'll give you a primary example. If we start having situations like one that took place earlier in the week where someone shows up to a spot, says, hey, we're coming in and we're investigating something, but we're not going to tell you who we are. We're just going to take these people out of here. And
you're talking about the ICE raid. It was a week ago as this airs at Takanganas, and we've reported on a bunch. But keep going.
Right. So in that case, and there's more information that came out after that. But the issue is, to the eye of the average person that's watching this, it doesn't seem like a situation that makes it's not a happy situation. I'll put it that way.
I'm going to come to you, Worth, but I mean, to Worth's point, people here illegally. Obama was, in recent decades, the most deportations happened under President Obama, right, statistically. Is it the nature of that specific event, or is it we really shouldn't be deporting undocumented immigrants?
No, I'm not saying that we shouldn't deport them. I think that should happen. Yeah. But I think the way we've sensationalized the process. I mean, when we WWE, just because that's what I'm calling it now. Every time I look at the news now, it's WWE. We got to sensationalize. We're going to sign it might be Kendrick Lamar can't be on the halftime show. I mean, that's how outrageous we see things now.
Yeah, and one of the numbers we're not talking about at all in this conversation is the tens of thousands of people in Memphis and Shelby County that are unemployed and that are here. They're citizens. They're looking for jobs. And if they were to have any of these jobs that are being filled by illegal workforce, they would probably have better wages. They'd have a chance to get them and their families out of poverty, and they'd have the protection of law. And there's a lot of exploitation that's going on right now around illegal immigration, where if they get hurt on the job, they don't get to file workers' compensation. If they're sexually assaulted or abused, they can't go down the hallway to the PR office. And the reason that they're being hired by so many of these companies, and some companies are just working with the system that they have in place, and they're not any worse. I'd say that they are not being abusive, but there certainly are people that are targeting this illegal workforce because it's a less risk to their business. If something happens to that employee, then you know what? They have no recourse and no protection, and they can turn them in or ship them themselves if they're involved in human trafficking back south of the border.
But then why do these federal officials with no insignia show up at some place and arrest workers they believe are illegal, but who have jobs, instead of the person who hired them?
Let's arrest them all. Well, one, it's going to be based on state and federal law, and you've got 50 different states with 50 different laws. So,
let's stay local. To the degree possible.
Let's
These
stay
are
local.
national issues that have local input.
One investigation is much easier and quicker to happen. You can identify whether somebody is a national citizen much more quickly than you can build a case of human trafficking and prosecute. So let's see how the facts play out on this. And whether they identified themselves or not, I'm not sure we know the answer to that. We've seen video that's been released by the suspect himself in the case, but we don't really necessarily know exactly what's happened in the Tacos and Ganos as it stands today. So I would ask everybody to kind of pump the brakes before they cast judgment or don't know the full situation of the facts on that case. But if we're going to talk broadly about immigration law, there's an extreme on each end. You're talking about the worker who's here for the dream, and they're here illegally, but they're working, they're keeping their head down, they're doing right, and they're not committing any other crimes.
And they're paying taxes.
Absolutely.
Some of the taxes, not all of the taxes. They're not filing federal income taxes, which, as you're talking about, those come down to the local and to the state level as well. But they are being exploited, and they are taking a job away from somebody here in Memphis that would want that job and is in a position, again, if they were to take that job, it would drive up wages for low and income workers.
Will, you want to respond?
Yeah, so when we talk about the jobs that they're taking, I mean, the jobs that these gentlemen had, they were working in a food truck. And, I venture to tell you the jobs that we need to move the needle in Memphis aren't those jobs. So, and there are a lot of jobs out there. I mean, I've seen the job market. There are a lot of
You would make the argument that no one else would take that job?
I'm not making an argument that nobody would take that job, but I do know that.
Then let's provide them that opportunity.
I do think what we need to do is make sure that we extend the opportunity for better jobs. One of the things that when we talk about a living wage, as you talk about exploitation, nobody wants an exploited job where the guy's paying this guy $9 an hour that's working in the kitchen and they're cooking and they're not getting paid overtime. So nobody's going to compete for that.
If no one takes that job, that forces the employer, it's supply and demand, to pay more. But he doesn't have to pay the workers more because there's a source of illegal labor that they're able to tap into. You eliminate that illegal labor, wages go up. Quality of life in Memphis improves. The poverty rate goes down. Unemployment goes down.
We've got 8 minutes left here. Let's move on to other issues because we could do 2 whole shows on immigration. Yes. But it's a big impact here. I mean, in the schools, in the voucher bill that was recently passed, and we talked some about that last week, and we've been reporting on it Daily Memphis and trying to focus on the local impacts of these things. But you mentioned something about guns, and I'll stay with you, Worth, because I cut you off. Most of the last couple of years, and the big spike in crime, which is coming down, national spike that was worse here than many other cities in Memphis, but it's coming down pretty, bit by bit. It's not as high as everyone wants. It's not as low as everyone wants it to be.
Right.
One of the things that people, Republican, Democrat, almost always agree with in the years we've been talking about public safety and criminal justice system is guns are too readily available. Bill Gibbons, lifelong Republican, elected official, appointed official, law enforcement officials, all have agreed. They're just not that we're going to take everybody's guns away. That's a whole other conversation, right? But this widespread availability, you can just walk around without carry. You can have a Glock on your person. You can have a semi-automatic weapon. You can kind of go. It feels like sometimes wherever you want. That's been a place of agreement, and overwhelmingly, the people of Memphis and of Shelby County, when we've done polling, want common sense gun reform, more restrictions. Where do you reconcile that in a high crime city with the state and the national agenda?
Yeah, so and I'd say when people talk about that there's need for restrictions in gun access and ownership, it is a huge continuum that we're talking about. In some cases, everyone will agree there are some people that need to be restricted from owning firearms in some people in some locations under certain circumstances. Now the debate all revolves around which people and which circumstances and which locations. And that's where I think, especially what you've seen coming out of the State House and the governor's mansion lately, is that you're talking about a constitutional issue versus kind of the practical issue on the street. And one of the things I've talked about for years is not everything that's advisable or not everything that's permissible is advisable. There are a lot of things that I believe the Second Amendment provides us or affords us as a right in the United States. Is that going to be the most advisable path to make sure that people who shouldn't have guns don't have them? Probably not.
Is that
but
what you're saying, though?
If you want to challenge it, you really don't need to be going to the courts and asking them to reinterpret the Second Amendment. What you need to do is have a conversation about the Second Amendment itself.
Do you hear that
and I
from
think
your
that's
Republican
been misplaced.
colleagues, that they want more restrictions?
No. Okay. I mean, I would say broadly that you want to make sure people that are committed to a life of violence and are going to use weapons to harm or threaten other people, they have to be dealt with with certainty. Well, and that's not happening either.
Right. So to that point, I'm a gun owner, and I happen to serve on the Shelby County Gun Safety Committee. And one of the things that we talked about is, we put together the first successful lock program, a mail-in lock program that we did in the Mid-South, and under Jerry Green and under Mayor Lee Harris. As we think about those things and we talk about guns, first of all, when we say restriction means to me, as a gun owner, is that everybody does not need high capacity clips to protect themselves. Everybody doesn't need to have certain weaponry at their disposal. My issue with, and I think what Democrats are trying to say, we're not saying get rid of guns, but what we're saying is if we have someone that we know that may have a mental issue, that we probably have to make sure that person doesn't have a gun. I mean, we've seen in the school shootings just recently, we have people that have situations where, from a behavioral health perspective, they may have issues, and I think that's something simple that we can agree on.
And I think those red flag laws are really going to be the tip of the spear, so to speak, for the gun debate that's coming up in Tennessee. It's happening all across the country in Republican and Democrat-led states, and we're about to have probably a big debate in the next 2 years.
Go to Bill.
A bit of housekeeping about the Democrats. The Republicans had their local convention in January. The Democrats have theirs in April.
Yeah, it's going to be in April, yes.
Okay. Will you be running for the chairman
yes.
at that time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Housekeeping done. I thought that was going to be it. Yeah. Both of you talked about how your parties need to each make up some ground. For instance, Donald Trump got fewer votes in Shelby County this time than he did 4 years ago. And the top county in the state in terms of turnout for him and for Senator Marsha Blackburn was Knox County. For the first time in a long time, Shelby County wasn't the most Republican county. What are your goals in terms of building?
Yeah, if you go back 10 years, in 2012, when Obama was reelected, the president, he got 63% of the vote in Shelby County. And when Mark Luttrell was reelected in 2014, 2 years later, a Shelby County-wide race, he got 63%. So what's happened in the last 10 years? Is it just participation and turnout, or has there been a shift in the way that people are thinking? I think most importantly, we have not had significant turnout in elections. 24% in 2022 is absolutely abysmal. Overall voter turnout. And what needs to happen, what people don't quite understand here yet, is how the local issues impact their lives. They see the national issues, they see the national debates, they get fired up about them, but they don't connect it to the local issues and showing up to vote on local elections. Sorry.
No, you're good.
So what we see from the Democratic Party is we need to galvanize our base around some values that understand that your vote means something. I mean, there's been a national attack on voters. I mean, led by Donald Trump, always saying that, hey, the election system doesn't work. Your vote doesn't count. TikTok puts stuff out talking about the Electoral College and how that doesn't work. And we think, on the local perspective, it's not affecting people. But when you hear that every day, it keeps people from going to the polls. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we go out and we start civically educating people on how the voting process works. One of the things that's real serious about this is we need to make sure that as we have our conversations, truth should prevail about the voting process.
I want to start with talk about where there's commonality. And this might be pie in the sky. And if it is, you can tell me that. But where is there commonality in the parties? Because, again, we're so used to national politics being so polarized. Mm-hmm. But at the local level, I mean the state and county level, you see a little more coalitions. You were 8 years, Worth Morgan, on city council. You didn't just vote with your Republican colleagues. So let me start with you as a former elected official. Where are those commonalities? And
right now, there's a commonality around the Memphis-Shelby County School Board. At the last county commission meeting, it was a unanimous vote to do a forensic audit of the Shelby County School Board. So I think restoring that trust to both parties right now is critically important. It's something that's been shattered with the people.
Yeah, Willie Simon.
So around the school board, it's great that we're going to look at the budget, but I also think we need to look at the actual process of how our kids are being educated. I mean, the budget is one thing, but I always think we miss the point of going in and just making sure our kids are educated in the right way. The money, we follow the money, but we need to follow the actual precepts and everything they're being taught at school.
And I'll say we're trying to get a couple of members on opposing sides of the firing of Marie Fagan's Memphis-Shelby County School Board members in the coming weeks. And we've had numerous county commission members on the show, and you get all that stuff at WKNO.org or the Daily Memphian. But let me bring in Bill Dries from the Daily Memphian.
On the television show, we talked a little bit about the challenges among Republicans. Let's talk about it among Democrats, because while Kamala Harris carried the county as Donald Trump carried the state, it was with barely breaking 200,000 votes here, which was lower than past Democratic nominees. The state party removed Lexi Carter as the local party chairman. There were 4 co-chairs, leading to you becoming chairman of the party. What is it that Democrats need to do to put their house in order?
Well, unfortunately, we had that situation to take place, and we fought through that situation to basically keep the party together. But one of the things that has to happen is we have to get connected with the people again. We have to get out and connect ourselves with our elected officials and bridge that gap between the voters and the elected officials. Now, under Chair Carter, there were some things that may have taken place that I don't have privy to it, all the information behind that. But I will say that we were moving in that direction, and then, of course, that happened. And then in such a pivotal election, there was a lot of confusion around those 4 chairs. I'll put it that way, as when they came in. But, we galvanized our group together. We still went and registered voters. We did all the processes that take place during that cycle. And I think we did a good job. But I think at the end of the day, we have to get out and get more voters to the polls. We have to go out and make people want to go.
And to both of you, what does it take at this point in our politics to get more voters out of the seat and to the polls to vote early or election day? Because I hear both sides talking about we knocked on so many doors. Right. Meanwhile, you've got this thing called the minivan app that can show you which doors you think you don't need to knock on to get voters.
Yeah, in a campaign, you have a limited amount of time and resources, and but I think the job of the parties that exist 24/7, 365, and are always around. It's our job to connect the issues to the voters and why it matters in their life every single day when they wake up in the morning. And if you do that, you don't have to remind them. Come election time, they're going to get themselves to the polls.
Yeah, well, and then I think truth is and truth in voting and understanding what they're voting for and who they're voting for. I think having a real understanding of who your elected official is for your area and how they voted in the past, just understanding that whole process, that is really key. I mean, when you talk to the average person and you ask them who the president is, they could probably tell you. But you ask them who their city councilman is, you might get crickets. So we have to make sure that we get people more astute in that process.
All right, we're going to leave it there. I apologize to cut you both off. We could have talked for another 26 minutes. We're out of time. If you missed any of the show today, you can go to WKNO.org or to the Daily Memphian site, get the full episode and past episodes. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.